So how many people here work with pigs? Well, that's a good number, more than I thought it would be. So today we're going to go over the origin of swine, the natural behavior of swine, some of the natural and laboratory behavior correlations, the ethology and psychology of laboratory swine, going a little bit into their cognition, social communication, and abnormal behaviors that you might see, and behavioral conditioning and prevention of these abnormal behaviors when you want to reintroduce these animals. So I'm not going to come up here and say that I know what everyone's struggle is. I get the pleasure of being a breeding facility, so all of my animals are group housed. My biggest pens are 96 square feet, and I think my smaller ones are 24 square feet. I do have the advantage, though, of having a CRO on the same site as my breeding facility, so I get to use them as a testing ground and figure out what works with these pigs, how to reintroduce them to each other, and what you need to do to mix them after they've been separated. So, as most people know, swine are not native to the American continent. Polynesian immigrants brought the first domestic pigs to Hawaii in approximately 750 AD. By 1000 AD, all of the major islands were populated. Florida was thought to be the first state where pigs were brought, or feral pigs were brought, and then they soon moved to the rest of the United States. There's pigs found in every non-extreme climate in the world. There's domestic, feral, and then the wild boar. Most of what you see in miniature swine laboratory breeds are a cross between feral and the wild boars. Some people use domestic pigs for short-term studies. The wild Eurasian boar is the ancestor of all modern breeds of pigs. The first evidence of domestication in Europe is approximately 3,500 years ago, but before that they were actually domesticated in China, and they actually used them for work animals a lot back then, pulling carts and other things before a food source. They're non-ruminant, even-toed ungulates. Suidae are omnivores. There's 8 genera and 16 different species. Some of the purebred species you might know are Landrace, Yorkshire, Hampshires, Durocs. Of the mini pig strains, you'll see the Hormel, the Minnesota Mini, the Sinclair, the Göttingen. There's a lot of other what they call micro mini pig breeders out there now in the pet industry. I'm not truly 100% sure how miniature those pigs are. I've seen a lot of studies where people abandon their pigs after they get too big for their home. I actually had a guy contact me that runs a rescue facility and asked me how big miniature pigs are supposed to be, because he had a farm of about 400 of them, and he just caught them. People would release them after they got too big for their house. So a lot of what these people are claiming are miniature pigs aren't really. The biggest difference that you'll see between the feral pig and the domestic and the Eurasian wild boar is the slope of the skull. Most of the research breeds have a long sloping snout, where domestic pigs have a bigger frontal bone. Characteristics of feral pigs are that they're bullet shaped so that their bodies can move through the underbrush. They spend most of their time foraging and rooting. They're smaller, obviously, than domestic pigs, which is why a lot of people want to use them in a research setting. And in the 1940s or 50s, a domestic company called Hormel was actually the first one to start using pigs in research. They wanted to develop a smaller pig. So they took 4 feral strains, and the Hormel mini pig is what came out of that, which is the ancestry to the Sinclair pig that we use today. And the size disparity that they were having problems with was when they wanted to start these long-term studies, and the pigs were outgrowing their housing. So they developed these smaller animals that wouldn't grow as fast. Pigs, obviously, were in social groups, usually ran by the sows. It's a very matriarchal society in the wild. Their eyesight's poor, their visual field is panoramic, but they have excellent hearing and sense of smell. They're nocturnal during the summer and usually diurnal in the winter. The mature males in the wild and the breeds that we raise actually develop an armor over their shoulders and their rib cages that prevents any damage from fighting when the males start to get aggressive with each other. Pigs and peccaries are characterized by rooting behavior and their associated cranial features, including the elaborated rhinarium and the nuchal muscles and where they attach to their so-called neck. Which correlates to a lot of the destruction that you see in the lab settings. Pigs have to root nonstop. That's what they do in the wild, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And so you have to make allowances for that in the lab setting if you don't want everything destroyed and you want the animals to still be happy. So the regulatory guidelines in the last few years have really pushed more for social housing, which is why we're all here to explain this a little better. I get to explain this to my clients a lot. That's one of the big supportive things that we do as a company is help people solve their problems. A lot of people have never worked with pigs. They don't know what to do once their study's over and they need to reintroduce them. So the guide states that housing space or enclosures should account for animal social needs and that social animals should be housed in stable pairs or larger groups of compatible individuals. How many people out there in the laboratory setting have room to house more than 2 pigs in a pen? That's good. 5? Well, that's pretty good. So a lot of laboratories don't have that space, period. Like I said, in our breeding facility, in my big pens, I can put up to 22 70-kilo animals in there. So as the body weight decreases, the more animals I can put in there. So I have to figure out creative ways to help people figure out how to social house these. And they also state that a single housing of social species should be the exception and justified based on experimental requirements or veterinary-related concerns about the animal well-being. The need for social housing should be reviewed on a regular basis by the IACUC and the veterinarian. And I find that a lot of institutions take this regular basis to be their meeting every 6 months of the IACUC. I personally feel like it should be reviewed at every protocol. There are some investigators that think just a minor surgical procedure is cause for single housing. Dermal dosing is cause for single housing. A lot of really borderline reasons I see for single housing, or that I have seen, that really don't need to be used at all. You could still socially house these animals. VAP implants is one, and I'll show you an example of that later. In general, more space is recommended for research swine than for swine in agriculture. The guide says that animals should be housed with the goal of maximizing species-specific behaviors and minimizing stress-inducing behaviors, which in pigs means rooting and having the ability to move about freely, and then more rooting. So where does this need for all the rooting come from and all the aggressiveness in the hierarchy? Pigs are very hierarchical animals, and it all starts at breeding. Obviously, genetic advantage gives the larger, more aggressive animals the right to breed in the wild. Embryos are advantaged with larger placenta coverage of the uterus, therefore providing privileged nutrition and oxygenation to those piglets, so that's really where the initial competition starts. Larger, more robust neonates fight for the pectoral mammary glands, the teat order, the higher milk production leading to the top of the nursing order and dominance order later in life. So you see a lot of these runts, they always get pushed back to the mammary chain, and that's why, because the more nutritional milk is actually at the pectoral glands. Typically, the dominant pigs eat faster and are consequently larger in a lab environment. We see a lot of that in the production setting too. It's kind of hard to feed, animals 1,000 grams a day and make sure each one gets that 1,000 grams when you have your dominant animals fighting for it. So they may be eating a lot faster and getting a lot more food than you think, which will cause them to grow faster. Normal behaviors in the wild. Pigs are opportunistic scavengers and foragers. Their sensory ecology and chemical communication is one of the main things that they focus on to communicate with strange animals or animals in their sounders. They produce pheromones nonstop, especially the males when they're chomping, and then they have scent glands on their front legs, so they'll either urinate or wipe that salivary gland on their front legs, and then that's kind of how they mark their territory as they move. So abnormal behaviors, we'll see a lot of conflicts, especially in a group house setting, fighting over resources, attention from the caregivers. But pigs are very smart, and they're easy to train with about anything. So you can begin a regimen of behavior modification to suit your needs at your facility. Some correlations from their natural behaviors and laboratory behaviors. Obviously, they're rooting and food seeking. That's how they eat in the wild, so that's why they root so much. In the laboratory, obviously, as everyone knows, the gates, hinges, pins, anything that rattles a little bit, they're going to find and make it very loud if they can. We've even had pigs. I remember a client of mine put some pigs in a modular building that had a plywood floor, but it was sealed and covered with fiberglass, but there were little fiberglass threads sticking up, and the pigs got a hold of that. And once they found that as a toy, they had drilled through that plywood in about 2 days by just grabbing it and running in a circle. So it's pretty amazing what pigs can do when they want to be destructive. The social order, the aggression, if you foster litters, not a lot of people run neonatal studies, but in a production setting, when you foster piglets from one side or the other, you start to get a lot of aggression there. Dominance hierarchy after weaning, fighting among regroup subordinates is always going to happen. It's just how you mitigate that. Dominance can also be extended to personnel. I've seen caretakers, try and get in the middle of two pigs, trying to establish dominance, and then, get bit in the leg or try and stick their hand in there. And it's just like fighting dogs. You don't really want to get in between them unless you have to. So in your facility's design, obviously you want to make sure you design the pens and gates that are pig-proof, if there is such a thing. Concrete walls 4 foot tall might be the best. They'll damage chain link fence, they'll lift gates off the hinges, they'll destroy the plastic covered flooring, they'll chew on ear tags and each other. All of our pigs have their tails intact, which we found is a good sign of stress if you don't have any tail biting issues. If they're not chewing on each other's tails, that means that they're pretty happy and they're not stressed in their environment, period. Chew distractions and natural rooting distractions are something that they need to have in every environment, whether it's a chain hanging from the ceiling or rooting boxes or kongs, something for them to chew on and distract them from the other animals and let them get that satisfaction of their natural rooting and chomping behaviors. In the laboratory, a lot of the aggressiveness you'll see from pigs in general has to do with their sexual drive. 99% of the animals that we sell are all intact, and they range from 3 months old up to 18 months old, and we group house them all intact. Domestic pigs obviously are castrated 3 or 4 days of age, so it makes it a lot easier to group house them down the road as they get older. Puberty onset in males is 3 to 4 months, 4 to 5 we call them sexually mature. Females can be as early as 3 months, and they're not nearly as aggressive when they're younger at social aggression. But the breeding females that we have, after they've been separated from their sounders or their groups and in farrowing crates for 21 days, and then they go back into their breeding room, they can get pretty aggressive. I've seen some female fights that were a lot worse than the males. Males will also go over the top of pens in your laboratory. It's recommended that you have at least 4 or 5 foot sidewalls. I've seen pigs jump 4.5 foot tall sidewalls, jump pen to pen to pen to find a female in heat. So you always want to segregate on either side of the room. That way you don't have accidental pregnancies on your studies. So pigs in general have an excellent memory. They're akin to dogs really as far as trainability and their longevity of their memory and the things that they remember. They have a really keen ability to learn. You can also habituate them to just certain habits, but as long as they can predict the outcome of something, the learning has occurred usually when you're trying to do the training. Food selection and acquisition, a lot of that memory comes from where they had to travel and forage for their food. The ability to learn is because they have to do things by choice or fear. Those are the two main drivers for pigs anywhere. It's either because they want to do it or because they're afraid to do it. So that's how they react in the laboratory. They also acquire experience. They're very good at observatory behavior. We saw a lot of instances when I worked in commercial farms where animals would not want to go out the door up a loading chute, but as soon as the first pig went, everybody else was fine with it. It's just getting that first one up. And once they observed that he was fine, everyone else would go right out the door. So their sensory systems, are 99% of makeup how they react to humans in the laboratory. They don't have very good sight compared to cattle. What a cow would see at 200 feet, a pig would have to be at 20 feet to see. They can recognize people. They're dichromatic, so they can see certain colors, red, orange. But they do remember animals that have been bad to them, occurrences that have been bad, anything that had a negative impact on them, they remember. Their hearing is really good, and their vocal response their vocal stimulation is what they use to communicate in the wild. So there's probably been recorded at least 25 different vocal cues that pigs use, from the subtle grunting that they do to let the piglets know that it's time to eat, to the excited squeals, to low, what we call a boring sound that the sows use when they're in heat. So they're very vocal animals. They're also very tactile animals. Their nose is their fingers, for lack of a better term. They touch everything, including each other, which is where a lot of the aggression comes from when you group house them. Their taste and gustation is a big factor also. They have a very developed sense of smell, and their vomeronasal organ is unreal if you actually dissect a pig nose. I don't know if anyone has ever gone into the turbinates, but their V&O is in the roof of their mouth, and that's where they pick up the pheromones from the other animals. And we found that you can also use that to your advantage a little bit when trying to regroup different animals. Something strong like Vicks or a mint smell, you can actually put over there and it will mask those other pheromones, and then it calms that response that they would have from the other animals. So adapting to inappropriate environment or coping strategies that pigs would use. During a conflict, you'll see their head turned. They'll move their head down and then raise it, and they'll stand head to head with each other. This is kind of a learned helplessness. They're not sure who's going to attack first, so they just stand there and wait for the other one to do something. In the laboratory setting, you'll see stereotypical, pacing, constantly chomping on their feeder, circling back and forth. There may be some vocalization. Usually you don't see a lot of that unless there's feed involved. The chewing and the tongue play is a lot what you'll see if the animals have just been moved to single housing. That's what I noticed a lot in the laboratory setting, is they were always wanting to chomp on something, and they were nervous once they got moved. You could tell they were stressed more when they were single housed than when the group they had been in before. And it was mentioned earlier to make sure you talk to your vendors, and that's one of the biggest things that I try and tell people in general is we can ship you the animals in pairs 3s, 4s, however you want. You just have to make sure that you let us know that and give any vendor plenty of time to make that happen. And we always give you, at least on our animals, the pens of origin. You'll get a big sheet whenever the animals arrive at your facility, and it shows you where they came from originally. If they weren't shipped that way, you can put them back in those pens that way, and that will reduce a lot of the aggression that you're going to have. Some of the abnormal behaviors that you'll see in the laboratory are caused by unsafe, aversive, inescapable, unpredictable, and uncontrollable activities. Pigs do not react well to anything they can't predict the outcome to. They're prey species. They're used to running from predators. So if something startles them, loud noises, a tall technician looming over top of them, or someone that they're not used to, it's going to be a fight or flight response. And usually that's the biggest stress on them. The lack of escape while they're in the confinement. We used to have a technician on the CRO end of things. He was probably 6'7". And he'd walk in there with these little bitty pigs, and he'd stand up in the top of the pen, and the pigs would freak out, just run everywhere. And that's one thing that I try and tell people is make sure you approach them at their level. That's going to cause the least stress and get you the best reward for your time, rather than freaking the animals out and trying to loom over them and make them feel like they're prey. So in most facilities, you'll see that chain is the everlasting pig toy. Stainless steel chain hanging in the middle of any room. Probably not good for dental studies, I've found, but they're indestructible, and the pigs love to chew on it all day long. They'll toss it back and forth. If they can figure out how to make it rattle on the sides of the pens, they'll do that. Here's a social group of pigs in a lab setting. Some places are able to get 4 or 5 in a pen, and that's awesome. Most places that I've been to or had contact with can get a couple in a pen. But you always want to make sure that you use their original pens of origin if you can, and then that helps. And you can even social house. If you're doing feed intake, I can see that maybe being an issue. Separate them while you feed them and then put them back together. If you're doing oral dosing and you're afraid that test article is going to get consumed by another one, separate them while you dose, wait a little while, and then put them back together. There's all sorts of ways to work around those exclusions to where you can keep the animal socially housed. So some of the behavior that you'll see pigs try and imprint onto animals, or I'm sorry, handlers, animals, same thing. A lot of times you'll see headbutting, and most of the time the bad behavior that you see in the laboratory has been reinforced and it's been trained by the handlers. And it's not that they did it on purpose, it's just that they didn't know any better. What I'll see a lot is for dosing or observations or anything, technicians walk up to the front of the cage and let the pigs chew on their scrubs. They think it's cute, fun, and it's not really play for the pig. And it's not play for the technician once they get bit in the abdomen. And then everyone starts to complain, but you've already reinforced that behavior. It's kind of hard to break at that point. So you'll see them nuzzling and chewing on the boots, other things like that. You want to try and stop that and just ignore that behavior. You want to get them to do what you want them to do. So you have to give them another target or another distraction to work on. We talked about the wild pigs living in large female groups. Most of those are matriarchal societies, so the males are a little bit different to handle in a single house or a group house setting. In the wild, the boars are solitary. Once they're weaned, they go off on their own, and then they just travel the country for breeding purposes, and that's about it. Miniature pigs are slightly more active than domestic pigs, 70% versus 80% laying or sitting during the day. Pigs in general acclimate to human in lab in less than 4 weeks, and that response can be accelerated by adaptation. So that's something else you can talk to your vendors about too, is habituating or acclimating them to certain procedures prior to shipment. Might be a little different for rats and rabbits, but large animals, especially dogs and pigs, I feel like if you can get your vendors to acclimate them to a procedure prior to shipment, it's going to make your life and their life a lot easier once you receive them. And social housing is one of those acclimations. Here's a picture of some standard caging. I don't know if that's what a lot of people's look like. That's from a client of mine. And they just have these standard pins based on what size pigs they get. They can put 4 or 5 in those. And then they can open the dividers between them too. That way they can have runs. The good thing about socializing pigs in general is it's minimally time consuming. It doesn't take much time. You can incorporate it into your everyday cleaning, husbandry, anything. Anything can become a positive reward for the pigs, even if it's just a scratch. You know, that's a natural behavior that they're looking forward to, where they would normally be grooming each other. If they're single housed, if they're double housed, they'll probably vie for your attention, but you could still reward them equally with a scratch behind the ear on the belly. Sham practice to procedures is always best too. Pigs like to eat treats. We used to use sugar water a lot. You can get pigs addicted to sugar pretty quick, just like a child. They have a sweet tooth, but we found for most behavior modification or social housing or anything like that, their chow, whatever you're feeding them, is the best reward. You just give it to them in small amounts. The biggest rule is that you give them the treat last. And that could be any treat anywhere. You know, we've worked with a bunch of diabetic animals, and BioServe actually makes a sugar-free treat that's really good for them. And some of them are picky. I always used to say that a Hanford, which is one strain that we raise, will eat anything. It doesn't matter what it is; they will try and chew on it. And then we found one a few weeks ago that wouldn't touch sugar. We had some technicians using Kool-Aid and wouldn't touch it. Wouldn't chew on the catheter tip syringe, wouldn't do anything. And it liked vanilla wafers. Why, I don't know. It was a different sensation to them. Fruits and vegetables are great too. They love the tactile response from breaking those up, and I found that zucchini worked really well accidentally. Last summer, I had an overpopulation in my garden, so I took them out of my pigs, and they loved them. So then we started getting larger things like melons and grapefruit, and it's good for them, and it's not going to cause a lot of weight gain. So if you can in your facility, out of everyone that has pig housing, how much of it is on solid floor and how much is it washed down every day? Do you use bedding? Not very many. So we have 2 different facilities. One of our facilities in northeast or southern Maine is actually a bedded facility, and our facility in Missouri is all washed down. And the pigs in Maine get along much better. They're happier from our perspective on that bedded system. You don't have to make a playground, for lack of a better term, for them because they have it. We feed them in the bedding. They get to forage for their food all day long. When you let them out in the pen, they take off and they run, which is how pigs play. They take off and they bark and run, and part of the playing behavior that we talked about earlier. And they just really love that bedding. So if you have that ability, that is one of the best enrichment tools you can use for any group housed animal or any group housed pigs, period. On top of that, being with other pigs is the best thing that they can have happen. Pigs are not solitary animals. They don't like being alone, and they will let you know based on their behavior that they do not like that. You know, we've had a lot of pigs single housed, I'm sorry, for 9-month studies, and by the end of that 9-month period, if you're not interacting with them on a daily basis, they just get to become a little disgruntled. Even though they can see the other pigs, they don't have that social interaction with them. There's some Yucatans that are all bundled up in a corner. which is another positive thing with the social housing. It gives them a little bit more heat when they're younger. A lot of places aren't able to maintain an 80 or 90 degree room temperature like some of the younger piglets need. So how do you prevent these abnormal behaviors? What we found a lot is helping the genetics by doing selective breeding is one way, your environment, and helping the pigs learn. When I say selective breeding, so we do a breeding score on our sows and our boars, or a behavior score, I'm sorry, and it's just a chintzy little 1, 2, 3. Do they approach you? Do they not approach you? Or do they run away? And that gets accounted for in our breeding scheme, in our mate selection, in hopes that, in a few generations, the animals are going to be used to human contact. They're going to be better with each other. So that's working out pretty well. Socialization, habituation, handling, stimulation, those are all things that they need to have in their environment. If not, they're not going to be happy animals, period. Part of what we do for socialization might be piglet classes, recognition by frequent regrouping of younger animals. Preventing overcrowding is going to help with social animals. Positive context when you're handling. You don't ever want to handle them rough or have a negative effect. Environmental enrichment. Exploratory behavior is self-rewarding for the animals. So if you make a rooting box or something like that and they have to hunt around and find their food, it's self-rewarding for them. Play, exercise, and training, agility training. There's all sorts of things that you can do to stimulate the welfare of the animals and make them happier in their setting. So non-confrontational, positive reinforcement-based behavior modification methods is kind of the basis on how we breed our animals, and this leads to them being more socially acceptable to each other once they're in a laboratory. You can take animals that have been separated for I've done up to 30 days and reintroduce them to each other. You just have to do it slowly, and you have to have a well thought out plan once your original protocol is over. A lot of people don't have that option. Once the study's done, it's done. Either they're terminated or any extras are put into training colonies, and then that's when you run into regrouping issues. Usually your biggest aggression will be regrouping of cage mates, and hopefully I'll be able to show you some strategies that'll help reduce that aggression. Even if pigs have been housed together forever, there may come a time where one decides it wants to be at the top of the food chain, and they're still going to struggle with that. It's a matter, I feel, of how comfortable you are with letting that happen, just like the rabbits. They are going to mount each other. They're going to scratch each other up a little bit. But as long as they're not, 18-month-old boars with 4-inch tusks on them, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's just going to be some superficial injuries. That being said, how stressful is that fighting to the animal? It's kind of a catch-22, but it's the long term that you're looking at and not the short term. Most of the aggression has to do with the social hierarchy, fear and anxiety. It may be hormonal aggression, or it could be pain-induced. It could have something to do with a procedure that they took part in while they were on a protocol. They could have an injury period, and that's how they're lashing out at each other. Usually it's fear and anxiety, though, or the social part of it. Now, with males, on the other hand, we do have a rule on our CRO side that no males probably 6 to 8 months old can be regrouped without a well-thought plan. In the production setting, we raise them together from the time they're weaned all the way till when they're sold. But even if you take one animal out of that pen, there's 15 animals in there. They have to reestablish that hierarchy. It's not going to be very destructive if it's just one animal being moved out, because usually you have your top and your bottom. Those two aren't the ones that are fighting. It's the ones in the middle trying to get one more place up the ladder. The intensity of the regrouping increases with age, and like I said, it's gender dependent. The worst are intact males after puberty. I don't recommend regrouping 12-month-old male pigs, period, that are intact, unless you have a well thought out plan and you're going to have a lot of time to put into the effort. Otherwise, you're going to put them in and you'll come back the next day and one of them probably not going to be alive. Castrated males have minimal to no regrouping fighting injuries. Females are more tolerant, but they may still have post-regrouping injuries. We don't see it as much, and the tusks aren't as prominent in the females, so that's probably why. Usually what you'll see is a lot of bites and scratches on the ears. It's important to remember that in that variation, the older females, like I said, they're supposed to be the ones protecting the rest of the sounder. So when you regroup them as they get older, that's the mindset or the physiological need that they have. And that's part of why they're so aggressive. So where does the aggression come from? With pigs, it's usually because of consumables, because of possessions. Their social needs or physical activities cause them to accidentally bump into someone else, and that's why they get aggressive. The teat order, starting at birth, maintains the hierarchy for life usually, until you mix those animals up. Typically, once that is set, the piglets, they know who the alpha and who the beta is from the time they're born until they're weaned. And then we actually regroup the pigs at weaning, and then we sex them by the room later in life. But they maintain that hierarchy, and there's little to no fighting, period, with pigs of that age. Nesting or resting places. So pigs are great heat generators, and while they're eating they get hot, and if they're in close proximity to each other, the hotter they get, the more frustrated they get, and then they're worried somebody else is getting their food, and that's where you'll see a lot of aggression as well. The grooming of each other, that's how they reward each other, or how they let each other know who's dominant and who's not. Pigs will actually, they don't really do a barbering, but they'll sniff and root and chew on the other's hair. And sometimes the dominant one will lay there while the submissives let them do that. So the fear and anxiety, you'll see some common threatening body language after you put the pigs together. They'll start out head to head, and then it's always biting. Biting or swinging the head, especially in the intact males. And then once the subordinate turns, then there's constant biting of the flanks or on the back or on the tail, whatever they can get a hold of, until that threat is gone. And you'll see that when you get an invasion of space, direct approach from another animal, looming actions, touching, loud sounds, talking or yelling, quick movements in the pen or around the animals. If they feel like their resources were threatened, pain associated with previous actions, fear associated with previous actions. If it was uncertain, what happened to them the day before, they didn't get a positive reward out of the interaction they had with you or the other animals, they're going to be afraid of it the next day. The hormonal responses in the males and the females, typically it's not a big deal if you're not doing piglets and sows. Most people are working with younger pigs. Aggression a lot of times comes from pain, which could be to the surgeries or from the cage mates or from the protocol they were on in general. Obviously not everybody runs Class E studies, but there still is pain induced with just everyday husbandry of pigs, whether that's an IM injection, ear tagging, and that can induce aggression, and they can take it out on the other pigs in the pen. So strategies that we use to reduce or prevent the aggression, the best strategies you can use are use their senses against them or for them, as the case may be. So if you take into to account their olfactory, their gustatory, their visual, their tactile, and their auditory senses. That's how they perceive everything in life. You kind of have to work with those to overcome any fears that they may have to anything that you're doing to them in the laboratory. And what we call anxiety to calm tools. For the gustatory side, since they're a sampler, they're used to foraging and rooting. You can use operant conditioning, and you can set up rooting boxes, pens, part of that to use that as a tool to help them be calm, get used to each other. This is an example of some of the pens that we have. So there's probably 25 or 30 pigs in some of those pens. This is one of our technicians that are just kind of socializing, so he'll go sit down in the pen and just hang out with the pigs for a while. That'd be the best job I could think of. And then oftentimes they'll give them treats just for the human interaction. If they come to you, they get a treat. That kind of helps too. But usually it's just being there and letting them know that you're not a threat. Then your response is unbelievable, really. For the sampling portion, we talked about the chain earlier. Sometimes we'll hang cotton mops or different things on the chains for them to chew on. We've made popsicles, fruit treats. So if you freeze a water bottle and put a bunch of fruit or something and drop that chain in there and then freeze it overnight, then you've got a popsicle on a chain the next day. The pigs love that. And they don't really compete over it because they can bite off little chunks and each pig gets their own portion. Foraging and rooting is another thing that you can use. You can make rooting boxes out of just about anything. Kongs with chow inside of it, or peanut butter. I really like the rooting boxes, and for larger pens, we've actually even used kiddie pools, and you can just fill them full of stuff that they can move around and get their food. You can put bedding in it. Operant conditioning, you can also train the animals. Target training, what we try and start out with when they're young is mat training the piglets, and that shows the piglets that the sow is okay with the human interaction, and then all as a group they all get socialized together that way, and everyone's fine with the technician and the animal or the human contact. Visual, pigs can't see very good. When we regroup larger or older animals, we found that if you go in and you turn the lights off in the room, that definitely helps with the aggression towards each other once you've resorted them. Even though that their strongest sense of smell is their sense of smell, it kind of shocks them a little bit when they can't see. So they don't want to fight what they can't see, so they're a little bit calmer. And then you don't see nearly as much of that aggression after you've regrouped them. The cage mate size disparity, that was talked about a little bit earlier. That plays a role sometimes, but usually it's only if it's an established pen of smaller pigs and you put a bigger one in there. The smaller pigs have already claimed the ground that they're on, so you usually don't have any aggression there. It's when you get pigs that are close to the same size when you'll really start to see more aggression. Go back one. So something else you can do to take that sight away is something that we call the calming cap, which is something that we made. I was tasked with reintroducing some pigs on our research side that had vascular access ports put in them. And they came off a study protocol, and then they had a couple of extras as well. And per the protocol, they don't have an exclusion, except that they were ported. But we wanted to see what the implications were if we put them back together, because everyone's always worried about dislodging the port or causing some sort of damage to the port or the catheter. And I didn't really think it would be that big a deal. the ports are placed right behind the ears on the neck, so it could be an issue if they were fighting, but they're deep enough under the skin that you shouldn't have any issues. So I just wanted to see what would happen. So we started working with these pigs using our calming cap. And I didn't have a video of prior to putting the cap on them, but we figured out in about 2 seconds who was the dominant and who was the subordinate when we opened the divider to that pen. So then we put the calming caps on them both. And the thought with that is that they can't see what they're doing, and it interferes with their smell a little bit, but not much. So it keeps those fleeting shadows and everything away that scares them and everything that they're afraid of. And something else that we've also tried is thunder shirts, or a variation of that. That didn't really make a whole lot of difference, but the sling definitely did when you're single or working with single animals. It's almost a calming effect when they're just laying there in the sling that actually squeezes them a little bit rather than just a hammock. So after we figured out who was the dominant and who the subordinate was, we left the calming cap on the dominant pig. And as you can see, there was no fighting. The subordinate didn't want anything to do with it, so then they just started getting a little back scratch. And next thing you know, the subordinate was like, well, he's not trying to attack me, so maybe I'll just go over and lay down and hang out with him for a little while. And this took us, it was about 6 minutes from the time we first reintroduced him to where we got to this point. So we did this in bursts. We didn't want to leave them together because we knew as soon as we took the hood off the dominant one, he was going to try and attack the other guy. So we did this 5 or 6 times back and forth. And then the next day, we were able to put a rooting box in there, no calming caps on either one of them. And they've been together ever since. So you can definitely mitigate that stress. And these guys had never been housed together before this. They were always single housed. Everyone was afraid of them being ported. So we got those dumbbells, and then we put them in the food pan and gave them something to root around. And yeah, after the initial, there's still little sharp movements like that where you can see there's a little bit of aggressiveness there, but they never fought. They never had any issues. They still had patent ports after, nothing was dislodged. So it's definitely possible. You just have to put a little bit of time into it. And like I said, have a good plan on how you're going to reintroduce the animals to each other. So there's several different things that you can do to reduce aggression at regrouping. There's all sorts of tools. You just have to figure out what your objectives are going to be. But I feel that you can always regroup the animals, with the exception of maybe, if you have a wound healing study or you've got big wounds on the back, something like that, where you do run the risk of hurting that tissue. You can use friends, which is the other pigs to put them with. That will help reduce the aggression. Odor mimicking or odor changing, Vicks or menthol or anything like that to put on their nose will help with that pheromone response. Enzymatic cleaner will help as well. I don't know if everybody's got all the time in the world to give their pigs baths, but we have actually used some stuff called anti-icky poo. It's an enzymatic cleaner for dogs, but it works good on pigs too, and they can't really smell each other. The mouthing of the cotton ropes or giving them something else to take their aggression out on, the chains, making sure they have plenty of environmental enrichment. Setting up the nesting or the rooting boxes, and then the petting and making sure that they get a positive reward out of everything that they do. Even if it's being regrouped with other animals, you have to make sure that that's a positive interaction. Otherwise, they're going to constantly be afraid of it. And that's it.